My dad was a great Christian. I was raised in a Christian family. I was teased because it was a Christian family and my dad was very out talking about his beliefs. Went to school, I wore glasses. Everything that you needed to be teased was me. As my dad was growing up, he was emotionally abused as a child. He ended up having anger from this. And then when I was 5 years old, my brother that was 10 years old had an accident and basically drowned. So this caused Dad to be more angry and it caused Mum to be very depressed. I grew up feeling that I wasn't good enough. I'd lost their attention because they were grieving in their own way. Then 3 years later, Rachel came along, my younger sister, and all I could see was that she got their attention and I didn't. So I felt I wasn't good enough. I wasn't Stephen, and I was very jealous of her. And this ruled a lot of my childhood as well. So I've tried in many different ways to earn Dad's love. I would do things to get his love. And as I found out later on, that wasn't the case. He loved me anyway. But as a child, that's what I believed. After my dad lost Stephen, he became very angry. And we would go indoors sometimes, and you knew that if he was angry, you needed to keep quiet. He'd come in for lunch, basically, and if the door slammed, you wouldn't say a thing for the whole hour that he was there. And with Mum, basically, he put Mum down all the time. So he emotionally abused her the way that he was abused as a child. When I was about 13 years old, I gave my heart to Christ. And I remember saying to Mum, how come I'm not happy? I'm a Christian, I'm meant to be happy, but I wasn't. And I tend to have this thing where I tend to make people feel that I don't need them. And I did it with Mum, regrettably. And with God, it's like, I don't need you. I can do this on my own. And of course, I would pray for things that I wanted, but just for things that I would want in my relationship. I didn't want to worship a God that I felt had let me down. I resented God. So I would drink socially. And then about 10 years ago, I realized that drinking helped me. It helped my anxiety. Because whenever I would go out with people, I was unhappy, but I was anxious. At home, even at Christmas parties or birthday parties, I was unhappy. So I wanted to get through these celebrations with some joy. I wanted to get through them without the anxiety. So it's literally over the last 10 years I started drinking, but it was about 2018 when it started taking over my life. Everything was about the drinking, getting the alcohol in the house, hiding the alcohol in the house, trying to hide it from my family, trying to be a good mom even though I never felt a good mom, trying to be a good wife even though I knew I wasn't a good wife. The alcohol helped. The alcohol dealt with any resentments I have. The alcohol dealt with my unhappiness. The alcohol dealt with me feeling as I was a failure because it numbed all these feelings out. I could live on a daily life even though I was addicted, and I wasn't living. It was just, I was going through the motions every day. Being an alcoholic, the only thing that matters to you is the drink. The only thing that matters to you is the alcohol. So we do hurt families. There are things that I've done. I mean, Abigail was running around after me as an 18, 19-year-old girl, driving me to the friends when I was drunk, caring for me when I was drunk. So many times I've hurt her, Christina and John. Many times they were there helping me when Matthew was away. Matthew would come home from work, not knowing if I was drunk or not. And I didn't quite realize how much I was hurting them until I got sober. And then you suddenly realize when stories come up, things that I don't remember come up just in conversation. It hurts, it's embarrassing. But you start to realize how much I was hurting people in my life. I realized there must be a lot of people with addiction problems, and even people that in the church that feel like their sin is so bad that God doesn't love them or they can't come to God. And what I realized was God brought me to this lowest point. I mean, if people would look at me in the church, they would never assume that I was an alcoholic. I hid things very well, but I still didn't understand the gospel. I was still unhappy, and nobody could tell me why. You'd be there and everybody would be so happy. The women would turn around and seem to have everything together. Everything was organized. Their houses were tidy. You'd ask them how they were doing. We're doing great. God loves us. I felt miserable, unhappy, angry. So I wasn't good enough. I wasn't good enough to be in this church. I wasn't good enough to be around these women. How could God love me of all these sin when even in church I sinned too much to be going to this church? You felt like you had to be perfect. When I started to tell people in the family, Matthew and my children, each one of them, none of them condemned me. Everyone told me how they loved me and how proud they were of me. And this kind of threw me. Why was they proud? Why did they love me? I wasn't perfect. I couldn't do anything perfect. But they did. And that was one way of God showing his love for me. I expected them all to hate me, to turn their back on me. How could they love me? At this stage, I realized it wasn't only my family I was hurting. I could lose everything. I could lose my job. I could lose my family. I could lose looking after my granddaughter. I was letting everybody down. So that night, I decided I went to AA. And I went to AA for the next 90 days, every day, a meeting a day. But what I found there were many of these stories from these people that had been clean from alcohol for tens of years, many years, were actually found that it was God who helped them. There was many testimonies where they got to their lowest point and the only place they could do was to pray and ask for God's help. And God was revealing himself to these people amazingly. God had humbled me. He brought me to this place in my life where the only thing that I could do to get out of it was to pray and to ask for God's help. And I did. And a miracle happened. He saved me from myself. He saved me from my sin. And I've learned that he loved me. All the things that he allowed to happen to me during my life wasn't to hurt me, but it was in his plan. But his amazing grace drew me to him continually. I was healed from rheumatoid arthritis. I had 4 daughters when I was told I could not get pregnant. So many different healings and things carried on in my life that I had seen, but I'd never taken that resurrection power and actually realized that it was there for me. But the fact that over this last year, that God loved me enough to save me, and he went to the cross for me. Not just to die for me so I could go to heaven, which he wonderfully did, but that he uses that power in my life. He used it to save me, to get my attention. He uses it in my day-to-day life. He's active in our day-to-day life. There's nothing that I can't go to him and ask his help for. There's nothing that I need that he won't provide by his grace.